Good afternoon. I am Jay Rovert, founder and director of the R&B Group, and I'm here with a very special guest, Gail Conn, founder and president of Phi Power, a market research group known throughout the United States. Gail, what a pleasure to have you. And after doing my homework and researching your background, let's start out as your childhood. When I was going over the notes you gave me and what I read, I found it very fascinating, sophisticated, but very interesting childhood. Please start out. Give me a brief summation of your first 10, 12 years of what happened and how those formative years probably made you the person you are.
Well, I can say that I'm a very curious person. So I love learning. I'm one of those people who didn't realize that they absolutely are fascinated by so many things. And I'm not a scaredy cat. So I'm one of these people who is a risk taker. I have to be honest. I'm a very risky person. So I would do things that didn't exactly necessarily jive with my mother. My father was dead, and I was raised by my grandparents and my mother, and there's sort of a little old world. So let's put it this way. I pushed a lot of boundaries. I would do things that they wouldn't agree with. I wanted to be educated a certain way. And I found things very interesting that didn't really sit well with my family. So for instance, like a love of travel, I basically really introduced travel into my family. I was the one that, wanted to go abroad, wanted to go away. Anything foreign appealed to me. That was just something I was fascinated by. I worked for the UN as a kid. When I was a teenager, I was a student delegate to the UN on International Women's Year. I won a contest through Glamour magazine and went to work at the UN. And I was only 17, So I started to meet people from around the world, and it just opened my mind. And I became sort of addicted to, how can I get there? Where do I go? And the stranger the place, I wanted to go there. So.
And I thought by age 8, when my father passed away, we went cross country twice, and I thought I was sophisticated. So the other thing I found really interesting when you explained it to me was the dinner club you were part of as a teenager in high school. I just thought, what a great idea to teach a young lady how to develop and become an adult.
Well, I'll tell you, it's sort of a funny story. When I was about 13, I started to babysit. And when I would babysit, people would ask me, do you think you could make dinner for the kids? Well, I wasn't going to say no. So of course, I didn't even know how to cook at that point, but I would read cookbooks. From reading cookbooks, I started to cook. And so by the time I was in high school, I was a pretty accomplished. Basically, when the kids would go to bed, I would sit around reading. I don't know, but I seem to have liked cookbooks. And so I had this little dinner club where I'd invite people over, cook dinner. And then I also was into sewing at the time. So I would make little sort of treats for, I'd sew these little pillows for people that came to my parties. And then I even did it for the school. I would cook dinner for the parents and raise money for like the language club so people could go abroad and stuff like that. And then I even cooked in college. I would make food for the coffee house, and I even taught cooking when I was in college.
And how about going to the restaurants with all your friends, all your lady friends?
Oh yeah, so I had other people's parents, not my own, who would give us like dinner one night a month at a fancy restaurant in New York City, and we would go to a restaurant by ourselves and be treated by waiters and sort of introduced to sort of very sophisticated food. And obviously kind of upped my game then. And then when you travel, you really learn a lot. So
interesting.
Yeah.
You were being prepared for a very sophisticated life at a very young age.
I guess so.
And you went to Hamilton?
Yes, I did. I
studied in England?
Yeah, I went to school in England for a year. One of the best parts about going to school in England was before we actually attended school, we went to live at Windsor Castle for a month. So I actually got into a program, not as a foreign student, but as a full-time matriculating student at the University of London. And so a group of us were asked we lived at Windsor Castle, literally in the castle, to talk about history for a month. And one of the subjects we talked about was, what is a fact? I'll never forget that as long as I live. That was the most, I mean, I was 20 years old. I mean, it was pretty esoteric, but it was very interesting.
Yeah, and it applies to this last couple of years also quite a
Yeah,
bit.
exactly. So,
It's amazing how all that comes back. And well, fascinating stuff. And then you went into the business world.
yeah, yeah.
And tell me about your first job, which is when I found out about you on LinkedIn. And when I saw the Hollywood Reporter, I said, I must meet this interesting lady.
Well,
Talk
that
to me.
was ages and ages after I was in the business world. So I really started my work in the advertising world. I worked at like McCann Erickson, and then I worked at Y&R. My job at Y&R was to watch television to figure commercials we should put in what TV shows. And then I got into the cable business when it was very first starting. So we were selling interconnects at the time. I mean, when Time Warner, when MTV first went on the air, when CNN first went on the air, I was selling advertising in those mediums. And then
Yeah.
I moved from cable television to what they call independent TV that doesn't really exist anymore, but like, somebody who had a stick, meaning a tower in the middle of nowhere, with reruns. Basically, they didn't even have ratings. So I was able to sell that. God knows how I did it. And I used to sell what they call half hours. So like if you ever saw a commercial for a Craftmatic bed, or where they were selling you a half hour of time, I would sell that on the air. And I became known in New York as a very tough negotiator. It was so long ago, I really don't even remember all the details. And then from that, I went into television, and I sold top 10 markets and put together like multi-million-dollar deals for like Burger King and American Airlines and Valvoline and people like that. And then I moved to California. That company transferred me to California, and I got really bored after a while of doing. Got into the movie business, and I bought and sold movies, finished films, and then I bought scripts, and then I got involved in production, and then I left that and got involved in the Hollywood Reporter. When the Hollywood Reporter was going online, it
Yeah.
was the first look of going from print to digital. And that was a really interesting time because nobody thought digital was going to be anything. I mean, literally at the time, CAA, which was a creative artist agency, they had built a computer lab underneath the agency, thinking that actors would leave seeing their agent and go downstairs and create content. I mean, it was the early days of creating content.
Yep.
We were, people were doing what they call enhanced CDs. I mean, that sounds so ancient, but they were making, they'd make a CD, and then they'd enhance it with interviews of the band and other information. And that sort of market fell apart, and then the internet kept expanding,
And then you wind up at IBM, the most straight-laced company on the
oh God, well, that was really a funny period of my life, because when I went to work at IBM, I thought, wow, it's this cutting edge company, it's all tech, and I'm so interested in tech, but it moved like molasses. It was so boring, and really the internet was really blowing up at the time. So I was lucky. I got this job at a startup called broadcast.com, and it was sort of like the Wild West. There were not that many people involved in the early days of, this is still the early 90s, where it was still a burgeoning. Nobody really knew what the heck anybody was doing, what was going on. And broadcast.com was very cool because we were running by the seat of our pants. There was no playbook. Nobody knew what the hell they were doing. We would show up and explain things to customers, agencies, and they'd go, huh, what? But they wanted in. They knew they needed to be there. They didn't know what there was. And we were sort of selling air anyway. I mean, let's face it, what were we really selling? And so I did that. And then I was involved in the merger when we got bought. Broadcast.com got bought by Yahoo for $5.7 billion.
So exciting.
And it was a very heady time. I mean, you're in the room, you see the whole, process of going public. It was very exciting.
Mary Meeker was in the room.
Mary Meeker was in the room. At the time, I looked like I had millions of dollars in stock. There was a lot of stuff going on. But the thing that I learned is that, companies, again, they buy things or they do something with not a clear intention. I mean, oftentimes companies buy another company simply because they want to squash the technology, or they want to get rid of their competition, or they think they're going to exploit what it is they bought. And in this case, Yahoo did not exploit what they bought. And that truly pissed me off so much. I thought I got to change the way I look at the world because I don't want to be, I don't
Well,
want to be in them.
well, we see Mark on TV all the time.
Sure.
Give us 30 seconds about Mark. If you have one cute story or just a brief Mark.
Mark was the kind of boss that would be up all night long and could easily email you at 3, 4 o'clock in the morning asking you to do something. I mean, truly. And the thing is, the job at broadcast.com at the time was so intense that putting in, 15-hour days was nothing. I mean, you just did it because, first of all, it was exciting. You were making deals. It was happening. It was fun. And also, it was a small group of people in Los Angeles. So anybody involved in the internet, we all knew each other. Like you'd walk into a room, you were kind of like a rock star because you were in this. And mind you, Southern California wasn't happening nearly as much of what was going on in Northern California. I mean, Northern California was really exploding. And Mark was, he shot from the hip. I mean, he was a little wild. I mean, the parties we had and it was as crazy as you can imagine. And Mark was a little bit of a wild man, but this is before he was married and let's put it this way. He lived in this really giant house in Texas and he could ride on a scooter and play basketball all in the house. Yeah.
And that's the way he runs the team. And
right. He's a larger than life person. Yeah.
So, and now I guess more importantly, tell us about your new gig, your new company. Tell us about what you do now.
Well, what we do is we help companies look at sort of go-to-market strategies, their products, how to innovate in new ways. I mean, the thing is, to collect data is really boring. It's like watching paint dry. I mean, you ask people questions, they look like they saw them yesterday, so what we do is we enliven that experience of collecting data by enhancing taking everything, harnessing the internet and doing the collection in a way like a designer, because we design every project with real designers. So we use voice and video and animations, and we make it fun and engaging, and we get people to pay attention. It's hard to get people to focus. Collecting data is not like giving people 72 hours of Breaking Bad. It's boring. And so you got to do things that shake you up and make you take notice. And that's my job, is to make sure the data collection is good so I can tell a story at the back end that makes sense to the marketer. That's what I do.
Gail, knowing we're going to publish this video and hopefully give you as much exposure as we can, who should see the video? Who should see it?
Well, I do two things. I work with Fortune 500, Fortune 1000. So my customers tend to be big corporations. So I want to talk to product managers. I want to talk to people in innovation. I want to talk to people who are in customer insights, market research. On the other hand, I also do a lot of legal research. I work around copyright, patent, and trademark research. And my work is always in front of a judge. I mean, I've worked for the FDA and the FTC, and we literally are deposed. So our research has to hold up in court, because trust me, a judge is not a marketer. One question that he doesn't like, the whole thing gets thrown out of court. He's like, that's it.
They don't have a sense of humor.
I haven't run into a judge yet that does. No. And lawyers don't, for that matter. Lawyers are out to win. And if they're absolutely needing to do discovery, that it's hard to be able to prove their point.
Sure.
They've got to be able to build that case with statistics. So that's what I provide for them.
That's fine. Gail, so in finishing up and concluding, why don't you speak, and say also something about our group. You've been very loyal to our group.
Yeah.
Listening to you, you're a very, very sophisticated, worldly person. So we feel privileged.
Well, thank you. The group is filled with very interesting people in finance, people in technology, people in real estate, educators. It's a very good cross section of the modern world, people who are very worldly in their own worlds. And it's nice to hear stories. I mean, we all try and collaborate, and people try and help each other. So it's a perfect networking group.
Well, and I think you like the idea they're talented, nice people.
Yes, oh, that is obviously true. And people who are willing to help each other. I mean, at the end of the day, people have to be willing to make time for others. And in a group that people wanting to do that, that's really music to most people's ears.
Gail, what an education this has been for me, because I was reading over your stuff. I read your profile. I asked you to give me more feedback, and I learned so much in the last 10, 15 minutes. I'm sure so did Larry, our producer. So
Cool.
thank you so much.
And thank
Uh,
you.
And I'm
Appreciate
looking
it.
forward to seeing you at our next event, and hopefully
Absolutely.
many more, and meet some of your wonderful friends and
Okay.
partners. So
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you.
Okay, cool. Bye-bye.